the fourth largest island in the Mediterranean and lies southeast of the French mainland, west of the Italian Peninsula and immediately north of the Italian island of Sardinia, which is the land mass nearest to it. So why Corsica is not part of Italy? In this video, we explain why Corsica is part of France, not Italy. In the 5th century, the western half of the Roman Empire collapsed, and Corsica Island was invaded by the Vandals and the Ostrogoths, briefly recovered by the Byzantines. It soon became part of the kingdom of the Lombards. Pepin the Short, king of the Franks and Charlemagne's father, expelled the Lombards and nominally granted Corsica to Pope Stephen II. In the first quarter of the 11th century, Pisa and Genoa together freed the island from the threat of Arab invasion. After that, the island came under the influence of the Republic of Pisa. The crushing defeat experienced by Pisa in 1284 in the Battle of Meloria against Genoa had among its consequences the end of the Pisan rule, and the beginning of the Genoese influence in Corsica. This was contested initially by the King of Aragon, who in 1296 had received from the Pope the investiture over Sardinia and Corsica. A popular revolution against this and the feudal lords, led by Sambucuccio de Lando, got the aid of Genoa. After that, the Sismont was ruled as a league of communion churches. After the Italian experience, the following 150 years were a period of conflict, when the Genoese rule was contested by Aragon, the local lords, the Comuni and the Pope. Finally, in 1450 Genoa ceded the administration of the island to its main bank, the Bank of St. George, which brought peace. In the 16th century, the island entered into the fight between Spain and France for supremacy in Italy. In 1553, a Franco-Ottoman fleet occupied Corsica, but the reaction of Spain and Genoa, led by Andrea Doria, re-established the Genoese supremacy on the island, confirmed by the Peace of Cato Cambresi. 7. The unlucky protagonist of this episode was Sampiero di Bastilica, who would later come to be considered a hero of the island. Their power was reinstated. The Genoese did not allow the Corsican nobility to share in the government of the island and oppressed the inhabitants with a heavy tax burden. On the other hand, they introduced the chestnut tree on a large scale, improving the diet of the population, and built a chain of towers along the coast to defend Corsica from the attacks of the Barbary pirates from North Africa. 8. The period of peace lasted until 1729, when the refusal to pay taxes by a peasant sparked the general insurrection of the island against Genoa. In 1729 the Corsican Revolution for independence from Genoa began, first led by Luigi Giuffre and Giacinto Paoli, and later by Paoli's son, Pasquale Paoli. After 26 years of struggle against the Republic of Genoa, plus an ephemeral attempt to proclaim in 1736 the independent kingdom of Corsica under the German adventurer Theodor von Neuhoff, the independent Corsican Republic was proclaimed in 1755 under the leadership of Pasquale Paoli and remained sovereign until 1769 when the island was conquered by France. The first Corsican constitution was written in Italian, the language of culture in Corsica until the middle of the 19th century, by Paoli. The Corsican Republic was unable to eject the Genoese from the major coastal fortresses, Calvi and Bonifacio. After the Corsican conquest of Caprea, a small island of the Tuscan archipelago, in 1767, the Republic of Genoa, exhausted by 40 years of fighting, decided to sell the island to France which, after its defeat in the 7 Years' War, was trying to reinforce its position in the Mediterranean. In 1768, with the Treaty of Versailles, The Genoese Republic conceded the region to the French troops to subdue the rebels, and Genoa had to pay for the costs. The French though remained in forts and never seriously faced the rebellion in order to make the expenditure costs of the army levitate and induce the Genoese to not being able to afford to pay their debt. Later French reclaimed so rights to occupy the island, but that was never actually ceded or approved by the Republic of Genoa. After an initial successful resistance culminating with the victory at Borgo, the Corsican Republic was crushed by a large French army led by the Count of Vaux at the Battle of Pont Novo. This marked the end of Corsican sovereignty. Despite triggering the Corsican crisis in Britain, whose government gave secret aid, no foreign military support came for the Corsicans. However, nationalist feelings still ran high. Despite the conquest, Corsica was not incorporated into the French state until 1789. Following the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789, Pasquale Paoli was able to return to Corsica from exile in Britain. In 1794, he invited British forces under Lord Hood to intervene to free Corsica from French rule. Anglo-Corsican forces drove the French from the island and established an Anglo-Corsican kingdom. Following Spain's entry into the war, the British decided to withdraw from Corsica in 1796. Corsica returned to French rule. In 1814, near the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Corsica was briefly occupied again by British troops. The Treaty of Bastia gave the British Crown sovereignty over the island. But it was later repudiated by Lord Castlereagh, who insisted that the island should be returned to a restored French monarchy. Corsica paid a high price for the French victory in the First World War. Agriculture was disrupted by the years-long absence of almost all of the young workers, and the percentage of dead or wounded Corsicans in the conflict was double that of those from mainland France. Moreover, the protectionist policies of the French government, started in the 1880 and never stopped, had ruined the Corsican export of wine and olive oil, and forced many young Corsicans to emigrate to mainland France or to the Americas. In reaction to these conditions, a nationalist movement was born in the 1920s around the newspaper A Movera, having as its objective the autonomy of the island from France. In the 1930s, many exponents of this movement became irredentist, seeing annexation of the island to fascist Italy as the only solution to its problems. Under Benito Mussolini, annexation of Corsica had become one of the main goals of Italy's unification policy. After the collapse of France to the German Wehrmacht in 1940, Corsica came under the rule of the Vichy French regime, which was collaborating with Nazi Germany. 16. In November 1942, the island was occupied by Italian and German forces following the Anglo-American landings in North Africa. After the Italian armistice in September 1943, Italian and Free French forces pushed the Germans out of the island, making Corsica the first French department to be freed. 17. Subsequently, the U.S. military established 17 airfields, nicknamed as Corsica, which served as bases for attacks on targets in German-occupied Italy. The Corsicans who promoted the ideal of Corsican irredentism published mainly in Italy, because of the persecutions from the French regime in the island in the first half of the 20th century. Many Corsicans, notably Pietro Giovacchini, Simon Pietro Cristofini and Marco Angeli di Sartane, supported Italian irredentism on the island. Cristofini was executed by the French authorities. Angeli and Giovacchini were also condemned to death, but they escaped in Italy.